It's nice to see everyone again. I think this is our third annual trip here, so I'm not often invited back to too many places, so it's a pleasure to be here. Let me start off, kind of set your expectations a little bit. What we'll do is, by the time you get out of the room tonight, I hope to give you a good sense of where we see this marketplace going in terms of construction activity for certainly the rest of this year and possibly a little bit beyond that. What we'll do, though, is we'll start with a big picture point of view, kind of talk about the overall national perspective, the national economy, which to some degree kind of frames or sets limits in terms of how local marketplaces will react. And from there, we'll move down to what we're seeing in terms of construction activity here in the state of Oregon. And we'll break that activity down into certain structure types. So we'll kind of take a sample tour through housing, we'll take a sample tour through multifamily construction, we'll look at some of the private sector, we'll look at some of the public sector, we'll look at some of the public works, and then we'll share with you our actual numbers by the time we get through. You should be aware of the fact that our national forecast is in a booklet out in the front on your way out. Please feel free to pick that up. And Ellen will also be distributing the presentation here tonight to anybody that is interested in it. If you'd like to give us your card, we'd be happy to email that to you so we can get it out to you. So with that said, let me give you kind of a sense of where things are at, kind of on the national perspective, and how it relates to construction activity. This has been a relatively interesting recovery. What you're looking at graphically there over on the left-hand side is gross domestic product, so it's probably the most comprehensive measure of economic performance in the United States, starting back at about '05 and then going forward from there. You can see the depth of the recession that we experienced, and frankly this downturn was one of the most severe recessions we have experienced, going all the way back to the Great Depression. This was extremely harmful in terms of the marketplace, and it took us an extended period of time to get out of this. As we recovered, and we've been in that now for a period of time, what has characterized this particular recovery is that it seems to get going, start to accelerate a little bit, something sets it off and pulls it back, it slows down, it starts to pick up again, it starts to slow down again. It's this pace of some acceleration followed by a little bit of deceleration, followed by some acceleration again. And frankly, whereas in other recoveries, once the economy seems to get some momentum going, it just blows through some of the things that tends to distort the recovery period or distort the upturn. That isn't what we see here. Essentially what you have is you see a little bit of frustration in terms of Washington and an inability to get to work through a budget, and activity pulls down. You have a very difficult winter conditions last year, and the economy slows down. You have threats of problems in terms of Europe, and the economy slows down. As we go into 2016, we frankly expect the beginning of this year to be somewhat similar to that. Frankly, the challenges that we face and that we see out there right now are you're beginning to see an extremely strong dollar compared to the rest of the marketplace, compared to the funds in the rest of the world, which will, to some degree, depress a little bit in the industrial side. The whole commodity end of the marketplace out there is under quite a bit of duress. Oil was a bit under $30 a barrel today. It has some positive influence, but we haven't quite seen the consumer react positively to that decline in terms of oil prices yet. So the overall impact has been oil's decline has not yet been offset by this increase in terms of consumer spending. And there's a great deal of distress out in the Middle East right now, and that type of instability causes a bit of cautiousness in the economy overall. Moving forward, probably the most important thing to watch for us in terms of 2016, in terms of its contribution to economic performance in the U.S. is going to be the consumer. If we can start to see the consumer begin to spend a little bit more, start to see some positive impact of the employment numbers that we've seen over the last few years, and also start to see some of those funds being spent that are being saved that might have gone to gasoline and now to be pushed into the economy a little bit more, we'll start to maintain we'll see a pretty strong recovery there. Our current expectations when we put this together in October of last year was we thought we'd see GDP up about 2.9% for this year, so it's still a little bit under 3. We may be backing off of that a little bit because we are a bit concerned about this first quarter, but you're probably still going to come in with a forecast a little bit over 2.5. The other issue I think that's important to be looking at, and it has some impact on how the marketplace is performing, and certainly has over the last few years, is employment. Because frankly, if the consumer is going to be extremely important, and we need to see some consumption help drive numbers, these employment numbers that we're seeing, that we have been seeing right now, and have been continuing to pump in very positively, are important to watch. But I think you should expect the following. We're beginning to see the employment rate, or the unemployment rate, get down into the around 5, below 5 level. Although you still have a large share of the population that isn't participating yet, you're really getting to a point where you're starting to have more and more difficulty throughout the economy to find people to move into jobs that are open. So you may see less nominal monthly increase in employment. We had very good numbers last week. It was 292,000. We pushed around 270, 275 for the last few months. But you're probably going to see that number fall back a little bit, particularly as a result of the fact that that unemployment number has gotten to the place that it has. It's harder to find people. I think it will be offset to some degree by the fact that you'll begin to see wages start to go up. Frankly, we already started to see them a little bit last year. Wages were up for about 2.4%. We should start to see some improvement in that number as we move into 2016, 2017. All of that should contribute to a consumer increasingly being in a position to spend money and drive some growth in the overall economy. As specific to construction activity, what you're looking at here are two graphs of what's called the Dodge Momentum Index. Many of you are probably very comfortable with the Architectural Billings Index. This is a very similar concept. What we found is, as we gather new construction information and generate brand new issue Dodge reports to our database, it is correlated very well with construction starts between 12 and 18 months in the future. And so what you see there in that top graph is that goes back a number of months, but you can see the increase in activity during the recovery, during the period that really we had sharp acceleration, and then of course 2008, 2009, you see the sharp downturn. You can see there was almost somebody turned off a light switch in terms of construction activity. It was extremely difficult to find new work. And obviously construction starts fell commensurately. You can see how sharp that decline is in terms of the activity we were able to gather. And then basically, the rest of the economy started to show signs of recovery, and construction activity lagged a little bit. So it was a period of time before construction started to take off. And now what you're beginning to see is a nice, sustained, progressive increase in terms of construction. A couple of other insights that you can take from this. The overall direction is very positive. Starts we should expect to continue to trend up fairly well. We're still, however, a long ways from where we were in terms of new projects filling the pipeline, and we probably won't reach the peak levels that we did in 2006 and 2007, because frankly, a lot of that activity created a bubble, but there's still room for growth in terms of this industry from a historical perspective, in terms of the number of projects. And there's no question about the fact that the marketplace is turning up. It has been turning up and has been in a sustained recovery. If you look at the bottom graph, the blue is commercial or private general building construction, The red is institutional or mostly public construction activity, and you can see that they behaved a little bit differently, and they are behaving. On the commercial side, on the private side, you can see it was hit more dramatically, turned down more sharply, but now is beginning to cross the line in terms of doing more than what we're seeing on the public side and trending up fairly well. The public side did not quite fall as much, but also has not quite recovered as much. So there's still some room theoretically on that public side for some additional growth, and the private side is already tending up fairly significantly. If you break national construction activity down into 4 different groups, you have single-family construction activity, residential construction, which includes single and multi, over there on the top left. You have commercial construction activity on the top right, public works, bottom left, institutional construction on the bottom right. You see an interesting trend going on right now. And that is that almost all of the types of construction nationally right now seem to be experiencing a bit of a pause in terms of the level of construction activity. It's not terribly unusual. We actually experienced this in 95 and into 96, in 2000 to 2002. So you can have longer extended periods of kind of a pause a little bit, but it's just kind of a leveling off, and some of it may reflect some of the nervousness that happens to be in the marketplace right now. There also may be some impact in terms of the ability to find labor in terms of the marketplace now. That's going to put some limits on what we're able to do. It's probably the most significant thing I hear as I go from marketplace to marketplace in terms of what's your biggest problem. As the market has turned up, the best marketplaces around the country, the biggest challenge is really finding skilled people to get out to the job site. We are seeing a little bit of hesitancy in terms of construction activity overall, and as you can see by this graphic, it's almost occurring in every single major type of construction. I want to spend a few minutes on housing, single-family housing, and even though I recognize that a lot of people in this room probably aren't into that type of work necessarily, I do want to make one very important point, and that is there's probably no better indicator of how a market will do than its measure of single-family construction activity. In other words, if you are building homes, you will build schools, you will build roads, you will build shopping centers, you will build buildings to support those populations. Frankly, if you have no growth in population, but that population is moving around a little bit, and it's building homes in an effort to do that, you will have construction that will chase those homes. So housing is a really important thing to look at, and what I want you to take note of is that's the graph of single-family housing on the top right-hand side. You can see the run that we had over that 16-year period of time. I mean, we had a tremendous run in terms of construction, and then you can see how sharply the recession hit construction, hit single-family construction activity. You also can see that it's come back, but I want you to take note that it has not come back nearly at the rate that it was at before. Now, some of that is the kind of, let's call it the demographics of the population. We've got some challenges in terms of entry-level home buyers getting into the marketplace because home prices have accelerated quite a bit and wages haven't really kept up with a lot of that home price acceleration. But you also have a significant contribution that's a result of the fact that a lot of the population that owns homes and would likely be buying up or buying additional homes are somewhat constricted by the financial circumstances they found themselves in as a result of that downturn. You can see that visually in the graph over there to the bottom right. The graph to the bottom right is Case-Shiller S&P. It reflects what home prices have done over the last 15 or 20 years or so. So what you can see here is, you can see the sharp acceleration that frankly in large part contributed to the sharp downturn in terms of activity. And then you can see the marketplace fell into recession. You can see that for a long period of time, home prices stayed remarkably stable, and now they are beginning to accelerate. Different marketplaces, this graph looks very different. You come out on the West Coast, primarily the graph was in large part much more dramatic. There was a much higher sharp upturn, sharper decline. Maybe different marketplaces experienced different levels of growth. In other words, if you look at Central California, you had a sharp increase in prices, sharp decline, but not nearly that level of upturn. You guys have experienced much more, home prices have come back much better here. Seattle's also been very strong, but here's the significance of that. That graph almost reflects the middle class population that's able to contribute to buying homes today. In other words, if you are, let's say for instance you were right there at the low point of that graph, a large share of the population that was living in a single family home was in absolutely no condition financially to upgrade and buy an additional house because you were underwater in terms of your financial circumstances and the most significant investment that you had. Only now are we beginning to see more and more of the middle class be in a financial circumstances where they can sell their house and make a significant financial contribution to move into a bigger home. And as these home prices increase, you have a larger share of the population that is able to contribute to driving single family. And as you have a larger share of the population that is able to drive single family, that single family number will start to go up. And as that begins to occur, you'll start to see more activity there, and it will pull other types of construction along with it. But the important thing is, home prices have to continue to go up. We have to find solutions in terms of the millennials coming into the marketplace and their financial circumstances. But this whole issue all around single family is one of the most important things in terms of the near term and the long-term circumstances that will drive construction. We start to get into this marketplace here. When you look at Oregon per se, what you're looking at now is single-family housing construction. These are our numbers now. You'll look at a number of graphs that'll look exactly like this. And basically what you've got on the left-hand axis is the dollars spent for construction starts within the category. And going along the bottom is obviously a time series that reflects a period of time from about 2000 and includes the forecast year 2016. What you can see here in terms of Oregon, in terms of single family, you can see the decline in activity. You can see a good 3 or 4 years where it really was kind of stuck, bottomed out. And now you can see a gradual, conservative progression in terms of increasing demand for single family homes. It's extremely positive. The numbers are falling in line in such a way that it is not distorting demand, so it's not driving up prices extraordinarily quickly. It really is a nice, conservative, temperate pace in terms of driving single family, so you're not going to get any bubbles. There's really no indication of a potential mess there as a consequence of this. And overall, that's extremely positive. In the near-term and long-term trends that likely will drive is it will drive demand for schools, it will drive demand for roads, it will be extremely positive. Now, here's multifamily construction. You can see, obviously the graphic is set up the same way, but you can see the behavior of the structure type is a little bit different. Frankly, you can see that, look at the very nice run in terms of primarily apartment construction that you had in this marketplace. It did not suffer through as long a period of time of downturn as what we saw in terms of single family. And then you see a really pretty sharp upturn in activity, and then it looks like it's almost kind of leveled off at a very high level. There's a great deal of work going on here. I mean, you got the Vancouver waterfront project that's been around for quite some time, the Portland South waterfront, Northwest Conway's a mixed-use development project. You got this beautiful Burnside Bridgehead project just down the block there. There's an awful lot of work here in terms of this particular sector, and the demographics for this are extremely positive. In fact, you can really break this sector down into about 3 types of construction activity. One is apartment construction, and when you think about what drives that, it's very sound here. You still have kind of the millennial generation, to some degree, may be putting off buying homes for their own reasons, so they're living in apartments, putting off buying homes for financial reasons, and then also you have any of those people that had complications in terms of single-family homes are driving demand for apartment construction. Plus, along with that, you have this consistent trend of roughly the same number of people that are getting out of school, and the first thing that they do is start to move into apartments. The expectation in terms of this category is it's still going to do very well. It's tough to say you're going to see higher levels of growth. You know, there almost seems to usually be kind of a maximum capacity for certain types of construction, and you're probably kind of getting close to hitting that here. The number will bounce around a little bit, probably tend towards positive. Our expectation in terms of multifamily, as we start to worry about it late 17, maybe into 18, we start to see problems in terms of vacancy rates. But I mean, your vacancy rates right now are, 3.5%, 4%, depending on whose numbers you use. Those are very, very good positions. The other category, by the way, that's also doing very well in this type of construction, this multi-residential type of construction, is senior assisted living. It is not nearly a large number here, but if I were to suggest to you a marketplace that for a long period of time might be a nice thing to hitch your wagon to, the demographics are very good. We have seen some concerns in some areas about reaching something close to levels of capacity, but it's quickly overrun as within a very short period of time as the population ages and you have additional demand there. It's a nice subset of the total. The apartment sector is much, much larger, drives most of these numbers, but that senior assisted living, very good place to be. You've got this Mary Woods expansion, it's a big campus project. You've got Cedar Sinai Park Nursing, Robinson Jewish Homes renovation project there. You've got a lot of work in that particular subset. And it's very difficult to see how that would tend to turn down for any significant period of time. I've kind of referred to it a few times as kind of a sleeper subset of construction activity, and my wife gets all very upset with me because she somehow feels I shouldn't use that term with senior assisted living. I'm not sure why. But it's a very healthy place to be. The other sector that is a bit of I got ahead of myself here. Can you back that up on the slide?
Hit previous. Oh, there you go.
No?
Nope.
Well, you know what, I'll speak for you. The other subset of the multifamily side that you should be aware of is we're starting to see some condo work start up again. So downtown condominium construction activity. It drove a lot of the growth. Frankly, it drove the spike in your number here. We see some of that coming back, but frankly, there is probably no more significant type of construction that has so much litigation as condominium construction. A lot of people seem to be very cautious with it, seem to put a little cap on it. We'll see how that plays out over time. Of the 3 major categories that are going into multifamily, it's probably the only one that we're not really sure how it's going to end up, and there may be some softness. It is turning up a bit, but there may be some softness. I do want to know, here we go. I have made a mess of this now. So you just about got the whole presentation. So here's, I'm all set now, I got another right page. So here's multifamily across the country. Now let me orient you in terms of what you're looking at. Largest major metropolitan cities on the left-hand side. The graphic on top shows last year what happened in terms of construction activity. The graphic below compares that to the prior year. The percentage reflects how much growth in multifamily that marketplace had in that this year compared to that prior year. So you could see, I mean, if you just go down that column and look at those numbers, you could see that, man, this is a multifamily construction. The demographics driving this is the same thing that's driving your demographics. This is a very, very solid market all across the country. And it's primarily just a result of those demographics. Now, the office building side, you guys also are in very, very good shape. Frankly, your vacancy rate's running about 9%. I would say you are you're certainly in the top 10 major metropolitan marketplaces in terms of low vacancy rates. And you may even be in the top 5, depending on whose numbers you use. So the demand for office space is still very good, and frankly, there's not enough of it here right now to serve much of the market overall. And what we are seeing as a consequence of that is construction activity beginning to take off and has been doing fairly well for a number of years. Frankly, if you look at most of the country, if you compare this market to most of the country, really the way that the office building recovery has occurred relatively slowly. And what I mean by that is, in 2014 and into 2015, there were really only a handful of strong office building markets. New York, and then those markets that are positively impacted by high tech, which included certainly Seattle, San Francisco, and you guys. And then also oil and gas. We saw real good numbers out of Houston. We saw real good numbers out of Dallas. And much of the rest of the country was kind of waiting for improvement in terms of vacancy rates overall. So you're really kind of ahead of the curve in terms of demand for office, and you far from outrunning it. So the office building demands here still is in very good shape. The most important number to watch is, if you happen to be in office building construction, is that graph on the bottom right left-hand side. And that is, what that number reflects is white-collar employment. And what is a bit interesting about that graphic is if you take that graph back to World War II, there was almost no period of time where white-collar employment went negative, except for in the last about 15 to 20 years. And that downturn, that sharp downturn in activity, you can see that it really impacted white collar and really changed kind of the vacancy rate numbers that you see on the top. But to the degree that high tech continues to do well and you have a good diversified economy here, this marketplace will do very well. In terms of hotel construction, you're also on a pretty nice run. You've got this AC hotel on 3rd. You have another hotel that's about ready to go in the Northwest. You can see that there has been a real sharp acceleration in terms of demand for hotel space here. But I'll caution you in terms of hotel with the following observation. That graphic there on the left-hand side is national construction for hotel construction, and look at how cyclical this demand tends to be. So here's the way hotel plays out. Essentially what happens when you come out of a downturn, you start to increase occupancy, but you don't make a whole lot of money. Then as occupancy starts to get pretty high, you start to charge more in terms of the room. Your revenue per room starts to do very well. Your occupancy tends to do very well. And that graphic that you see on the right-hand side is kind of the position that we're in right now. The hotels are making a good deal of money. The problem is you don't usually have to add a whole lot of rooms to most markets, and all of a sudden the market gets caught up, because you only have a small subset of business travelers and sometimes vacation travelers that are driving all that demand. So it tends to be more of a roller coaster ride almost than any other type of construction. Right now it looks very good here, but you're probably going to see a good year in 2016, Looks like there's some good pipeline work coming in 2017. We start to get a little bit nervous after that in terms of hotel construction, just because of the historical behavior of that particular structure. Here's warehouse construction, and this is kind of interesting. We're going to bounce around a little bit. Here's what you see for warehouse. There is an interesting relationship between warehouse construction today and retail construction generally. What I mean by that is, let me show you the retail graph. And you can see retail construction, you guys were on a very nice run. The marketplace declined a little bit. And it has turned up, but it has turned up fairly gradually. Now warehouse construction, you can see that marketplace turned down. You had a very soft year in 12, but very sharp upturn in terms of activity, and then kind of seems to be at a bit of an elevated level. We're seeing somewhat of a shift. As the internet is having more of a significant role in terms of retailers interested in delivering their product as efficiently as possible to people, whether they want it in a brick and mortar store or whether they want it in their homes, we have been seeing a trend towards warehouse construction or distribution centers picking up more quickly than the retail side is. Historically, it's never behaved that way. But under the current circumstances, the behavior in the marketplace seems to be changing a little bit. Now, Amazon obviously is distorting that number a tad, and you had some huge facilities for Amazon built all over the country. But there definitely seems to be this trend towards warehouse construction kind of moving up, delivering some of that product to the customer instead of it going necessarily to brick and mortar. The interesting thing to watch over the next 6 months or so is what the impact of the price of the dollar, or the value of the dollar internationally is going to be, and what the impact is going to be in terms of us shipping product out and exporters shipping product and another country shipping product in. To some degree, those are likely to balance each other out. You should see a relatively consistent level of demand at the warehouse level. So we don't expect this number to turn down a whole lot, but it is an interesting observation that those of us in the industry should be aware of, and you might want to be thinking about warehouse construction, particularly if you happen to be highly reliant on the retail side. Now, the retail side is also somewhat interesting in this sense. What we are seeing here, that graph on the left-hand side, is there has been a sharp increase in terms of the composition of retail construction such that there is far more alteration work than there was historically. In other words, the composition of retail construction consisted of a higher share of new construction activity than it does today. And it is our position that this supports the point that we made earlier about the significance of retail construction. And probably the best way to physically show you what I mean is this. If you have single-family homes, and they are here, and you have stores that serve these homes, and they are here, and these people don't move over a 10 or 12-year period of time, you're likely to update or renovate these retail facilities as opposed to building new. And then when this population moves, stores have to chase it, and all of a sudden you're building 4 walls in a row. What we're experiencing right now to some degree in the retail side is the fact that you had that softness in terms of single family. And as single family starts to grow, you'll start to see more and more of these retail projects chase those homes, and you'll see a greater share of new construction activity as opposed to renovation work in existing structures. In terms of the education side, again, in your marketplace here, you seem to be a little bit ahead of the curve. Most of the rest of the country on the education side looks about ready to get going right now, but you guys are a little bit ahead of that. The trend line is very similar to what we see every place else, and what I mean by the trend line is leading the way in terms of education construction is higher ed, and then K through 12 follows that. If you look at this marketplace, OSU, Oregon, great deal of activity going on in both of those marketplaces. Portland State even has a School of Business Administration, some work just got underway. So you have those colleges which tend to have a broader source of revenue streams. In other words, they can tap the Alumni Association. If they happen to be into mathematics, engineering, they also have a tendency to tap much to the private sector. There's an awful lot of money is shifted towards that particular area of focus. So higher ed has kind of led the charge, and then what you see is K through 12 falling in behind that. Portland School District has recently passed some bond measures that's allowed Roosevelt and Franklin high schools to get started. And shortly behind that, now there's talk of a new bond. Benson, Grant, and Lincoln are also under discussion now if those bonds do get passed, and we'll see some additional construction there. The issue of the demographics behind this, though, are unquestionable. You know, you've really got growth in terms of the school-age population that is going to drive demand for school construction. The challenge over the last few years has been figuring out a way to finance that construction activity, and now that the economy has improved a little bit, you'll start to see more and more demand. This number would be strong in 2016. We'll certainly not get out of whack, because there's certainly a conservatism that constrains the money that will flow towards the public side, but you'll see good demand for construction activity in terms of school construction. In terms of school construction now for much of the rest of the country, this is a look at activity by state. You can see that if you remember what we showed you for multifamily, you saw all positives. You can see what I mean. There's quite a few positives here, but there's still a few negatives in terms of some marketplaces are still trending down a little bit, or some marketplaces have just started their upturn in terms of activity. If you look at public construction activity, now this is 4 walls and a roof. You take the schools out of it, you can see the decline in terms of the funds that were spent there. And frankly, I'd almost call where we're at right now pretty much even. You kind of had a situation with the state capitol where it looked like there were some funds that were going to go towards that. I understand it's kind of fallen back a little bit. There's a county courthouse that is in planning right now under consideration. Importantly, building renovations, still looking for some funds. So you still have some struggles in terms of that side. I'd say that probably the way I would characterize it is it's really bottomed out and it's kind of a zero-sum game. There may be some indication it's trending up a little bit, but I think you're going to see most of the money on the public side go to schools in the near term. That's where the money will head initially. In terms of healthcare construction, there's a couple of points I want to make related to this. There's probably no better indicator of what uncertainty in the marketplace does to type of construction or financial decisions than what we see in healthcare. Frankly, the demographics for building construction in healthcare, we have an aging population. We have facilities that we frankly need to upgrade, or we need to have facilities that serve a much broader population. But there's still uncertainty about what the funding is going to look like. There's still uncertainty related to what we'll be able to see in terms of reimbursements related to Medicare and Medicaid. And all of that has kind of dampened a little bit of the construction activity in terms of the healthcare side. The other thing that I would point out about what we're seeing in healthcare is there's almost been a shift away from smaller projects towards larger projects. We're seeing an awful lot of big hospital work going on around the country, and frankly, when you see that, you tend to see numbers and graphics somewhat like what you see here. In other words, you spend $1 billion on a hospital on one corner this year, you're not going to put another $1 billion hospital across the street the following year. So the numbers do tend to bounce around a little bit and get skewed by major projects. But overall, I'd say it's underperforming for compared to what's in the pipeline. if we can address some of the overall issues and create a little more uncertainty in terms of healthcare, I think that starts to take off. You've got a lot of work here. Oregon Health Sciences University. There's a number of projects. The Clinical Trial Science Building expected to start next year. Knight's Cancer Center, another fairly big project. So there's definitely the behavior here is much like what we see in other marketplaces, and that is there's work in the pipeline, a little more certainty. You start to see this number, the number turn up. We're kind of forecasting someplace similar to what we saw in prior years, though, in terms of next year. We're not ready to call a sharp upturn in terms of activity there yet. When you look at healthcare construction across the country, you kind of see the same thing. You definitely see that issue of numbers being skewed a little. Look at how sharply one year outruns another in a number of these marketplaces. And a lot of that is just a function of the fact some of these huge numbers, these huge projects, distort some of the activity. You get into public works, here's highway construction. I mean, frankly, the good news there is we finally passed the highway bill. I mean, we passed short extensions, what was it, 34, 47 times over these last couple of years. We finally got a highway bill passed, and that ultimately is going to be very important. As you can kind of see, the numbers have really been kind of flat for the last couple of years, and there's been, although really what we've seen is more innovation in terms of local DOTs in terms of trying to handle this. I think you'll start to see some recovery in terms of transportation construction, maybe towards the end of 2016 and certainly into 2017. The other observation I would make, though, about public works in general is I think the lean, if you will, is more towards work related to water than work towards highway construction or transportation construction, at least in the near term. Passed a fairly significant water resource bill a little over a year ago or so, and I think you're seeing all across the country more interest in kind of water-related type issues, and I think that's going to lead the way in terms of public works. Highway construction is likely to fall in a little bit behind. In terms of highway work, what your behavior kind of looks a lot like what we're seeing in other places. You've got some positive numbers. You've also got some fairly negative numbers. You've got some big jobs that'll skew things a little bit. But the highway bill definitely has a very positive influence in terms of demand here. So here's our actual numbers. I realize that's hard to read, but I would encourage you to give your card to Ellen. We can send this out to you so that you can get a copy of this, but here's the bottom line. What you're looking at here is a few more structure types over on the left-hand side. Going across the top are, of course, years, and then the numbers are our real numbers. This can be chased back to a specific project, and below the nominal number is the percentage increase from the prior year. If it's in red, it's in decline. If it's in blue, it's in an increase. And if you look at the 2016 number, we're really expecting about a 3.5% increase in terms of construction activity here. That will be 4 years straight of very strong positive growth in terms of construction activity in this marketplace. Probably the biggest year was 2013. We had a sharp upturn in terms of activity. And then we really had nice progressive growth. The mix changes a little bit, but nice progressive overall growth in terms of construction year after year. It really comes down to the biggest challenge here is not necessarily demand. The biggest challenge here in large part is going to be finding the labor to continue to serve ever-increasing growth in terms of construction activity. I want to finish with one final point, and I think this is kind of interesting. What you're looking at here is a graph of the last 4 cycles of construction activity. Now, this is a national number, but you can kind of see that first graph there, 1975 to 1982, fairly sharp increase in terms of activity, followed by a relatively sharp decline. Frankly, if you go back to World War II, that's what much of the cycles look like in terms of construction activity. We ran 6 to 10 year cycles, and they tended to be pretty sharp upturns followed by pretty sharp declines. You'd see interest rates coming out of the recession being fairly low. You'd see very little contribution to the Fed in terms of trying to manage the cost of money. Money would turn up fairly sharply. Interest rates would go up. Mortgage rates would go up. Construction activity would turn down relatively quickly. As you start to see the 1982 to 1991, kind of that off red there, you can see we seem to stretch out the construction period. And then as you run into the last recovery that we had a tremendous run. We had probably the best run of all time in terms of construction activity for the length of time. But you can also see graphically, and I think this is interesting, that we kind of got greedy towards the end of it. Because you could see the increase in terms of construction activity, which was very uncharacteristic for a cycle. And that's driven by, people paying for homes and not having any paper to support it or anything else. You just have that sharp increase in demand, and that created the bubble and eventually led to the decline. But here's the interesting thing. That sharp red line there reflects where we are right now. It is remarkably similar to the last run we were on for a long period of time. Now, that does not mean, I do not mean to suggest that that's what we should expect, or I'm forecasting that, but I'll tell you this, it's a great way to end this presentation. So with that, I'd like to take any questions that you may have. Yes.
Behavioral health, specifically to that, I just wonder about the trend, if there's any drill down you can give into that regarding the healthcare sector and how the campuses are responding specifically to behavioral health. And building facilities to accommodate that demand in the healthcare market.
When you say behavioral health, now you're talking about the psychological side, sociological side, dealing with those types of issues.
I wonder if there's any trend in that area.
I can't say we break it down that specific.
Okay.
What we do, anecdotally and observationally,
Yeah.
we can definitely see at the college level, we science, math, engineering, technology, we definitely see money going that way, and we see lots of buildings that are focused in those particular areas. I'm not sure whether the precision in terms of what we have in terms of where healthcare seems to be going does not give us an observation about that particular type, and it's just we're not getting the data that deep.
Sure.
Or whether, and that entertains the possibility there's a trend there that we're just not seeing, but I really can't comment on it. I don't see anything that specific. I'm not that bright. Sir?
Is there any feeling for how long this trough in commodities is going to last?
Wow. Well, that's a great question. It is a little bit bigger also than my expertise. My expertise is construction, and it's primarily domestic in terms of its focus. But I'll answer that question just because I want to. I think the whole margin, really the margin play in terms of commodities is really what China does. And China has been a tremendous source of marginal demand. I mean, look at 2004. Look what it did to steel in 2004. I mean, you could, 2004, 2005, you could find steel any place in the country. You're going to need to. I think you're going to need to see some stability come out of there. And right now, there's a great deal of uncertainty about it. You're going to have to see. You're really trying to get a shift in terms of China to more of the consumer playing more of a significant role. And it's probably going to be a while before that starts to occur. And I don't see commodity prices really settling until there's more stability in the second biggest economy in the world. Sir?
What do you see as the biggest threats to this cycle we're on now?
Geopolitical. It's in large part the Middle East and things related to it. I mean, I don't think we are. We obviously are not as reliant upon oil, frankly, as we were at one time. So from an economic perspective, we can supply that ourselves in a much more significant way. But you know, when you start to look at just what a mess is over there and what the kind of potential that you have for mayhem, and I think that is very unsettling in terms of the economic marketplace. Yes.
Any insight into the skilled labor shortage? How did we get here? What do we need to do to address that?
We need a significant concerted effort, you know, by a lot of the, frankly, I think a lot of the associations in the industry. I mean, the way we got here, you know, I started my career in the 70s, coming off the oil crisis in the 70s, and the observation I have from that period of time for construction was you had all these people who had those jobs in the 70s, and then when the oil crisis hit, everybody left construction activity, and then the marketplace turned up, and then you had this next generation, and you had this huge gap in the middle of construction in terms of people. To some degree, we have that now. We had a population serving the industry that you know, that was nearing kind of retirement age or getting closer to it, and the trend line and the demographic, frankly, followed, you know, the national or the baby boom generation. So you have all these people in construction activity, and then what you have is this gap where nobody gets into it because there are few opportunities there. I mean, you saw how sharply the industry dropped out. You couldn't get a job here. Now we're starting to gradually draw people back in, but we've got these people retiring. We've got some of them that have gone to oil and gas, may come back and help us out, but a lot of them went to oil and gas, and you've got to fill that pipe, and we're struggling to fill that pipe. And we really have to sell people on this is a great industry. Yes, sir.
Back in the downturn with the lending institutes, lending money to people that were low income or high income that shouldn't have been able to been approved for those loans. Is that stabilized to the point that if I want to go out and get a bunch of money, are they going to do it in a reasonable way as far as approving people? Or?
You know, the Fed actually does a survey of lending institutions, and it tracks, and it gives you a measure of how restrictive lending institutions are. And I think generally, it's probably the lean is probably a little bit more on the restrictive side than maybe it has been historically. And frankly, I think a lot of that is because of Dodd-Frank and the impact of Dodd-Frank, which is not necessarily. I don't need to make a political conversation about that. But what it is, put restrictions on financial institutions, and they're now a bit more conservative. Certainly the ability to, you're certainly in no position to get money right now without having some significant backing in terms of what's out there. We are beginning to see some play outside, kind of in the shadow of the financing marketplace, if you will, to try and find other, you know, I saw something, I think the Wall Street Journal yesterday had something about FICO scores are not being used as significantly as they have been in the past in a number of areas. But I would tend to say this: the ability to get money is about right now. Maybe a little bit on the conservative side, but probably about right. We're certainly not going way overboard in either direction. Have we beat this up? Sir?
How about technology as far as forecasting infrastructure, building, fabrication facilities?
Yeah. Oh.
Is that kind of an open-ended question?
Well, I'll tell you this, data centers are still huge. Data centers are still, we understate the number for data centers because they're often a component of a building and we're not always aware of the fact that they're there. So we tend to pick up data centers, a major, you know, single building project. It has been a significant driver in terms of office building construction, you know, for the last 3 or 4 years. And frankly, with the issue of cloud, you know, everything moving to the cloud and everything like that, I think you're still going to continue to see that be a very positive trend. The industry, the technology in the construction industry per se, though, I mean, its application, you know, I can't say we measure that. Anecdotally, though, we definitely see playing a much more significant role. I mean, transmission, everything from transmission to plants to look at green building construction was something unusual just 4 or 5 years ago, and today it's commonplace. So how's that for answering the question? How I answer it? Sir.
You know, one thing you don't, you know, the 20-somethings seem to be buying the population of new housing. What we don't hear a lot about is the student debt that we're seeing in that generation right now. How is that going to impact the cyclical nature of the economy? There is absolutely no question about the fact that you just look at the overall debt number and it's far in excess of what it has been historically. And it's a big number. It's probably one of the most significant areas of debt that we have right now. A lot of that is because homes have fixed their their balance sheets, et cetera, all that kind of stuff. But you really have a lot of kids getting out of school with absolutely no foreseeable way to get out of debt in any short period of time, which precludes getting a home or making a significant investment. I really don't have a sense, though, how big that population is. I just read about it from the same thing that you're probably reading about it from. But I don't have a sense of, is it taking 2 percentage points off? Is it taking 5 percentage points off? I know it's a big concern, and I know it's a big number. I'm not taking any more questions from you.
On that same note, I noticed that the education had tripled since 2005 as far as local to the area. And there you have the discussion of workforce that's vacant from the construction market. You have the discussion of where that student loan debt has gone, and you see what the institutions have done to accommodate that influx of education. I think there's an indicator there of what's happening and where that workforce is going, maybe creating more stability in it. But I'm curious if it has a specific demographic or if it's actually spread out between 2 generations worth of time, because I can see from my side there's actually a shortage not only in workforce for labor but also in strong in engineering, strong in that second generation that's coming out of it. And I'm just curious if there's a demographic drill down into that at all, or if there's a correlation there.
I could just tell you anecdotally that I think the industry in general is very worried about it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of that, Mama wanted me to grow up to be a doctor and she doesn't want me to be a plumber thing. Somehow we have to, and I think this is obviously opinion, but I think that is more pronounced currently than it probably has been in previous generations. And I can't tell you I see that statistically, but I have a sense that that's what's going on. And we really have to overcome that because there are there's plenty of demand and there are limitations in terms of what we can deliver. Yes.
The legalization of marijuana, do you see that impacting warehouse construction?
Oh man, I have to tell you, it was the funniest thing. I just did this in Denver. The December 9th, I think it was. And I showed them the same graph, I showed you guys on the warehouse thing and retail construction. And the warehouse really in Denver was skewed even more dramatically and more sharply. And I started down this spiel about, how the retail side is shifting over, kind of what we talked about here. And I got this huge laugh in the audience. It took me at least 10 minutes to figure out what they were joking about. But there is absolutely no doubt about the fact that particularly in Colorado, huge facilities are being built
to warehouse sleeping aids. Yes.
What about prisons?
Ooh. It's funny you asked that because we used to keep close track of that, and I can't say that I've seen that number turn up real sharply. I'm almost tempted to say it's declined from where it has been historically, but I don't know that for sure, and I'd have to look. There are a couple of parts. There are a number of cities that do have some prison work out there, but I certainly have not seen it to the degree that we used to. When three strikes was such a big issue. But I can't tell you I've looked at it. I can't tell you I've looked at it that specifically. I hate telling the truth like this so much. All righty, thank you very much. I enjoyed it.